Karen stood at the door, her cold gaze locking onto mine as if she had been expecting me all along. "You think you've won?" she asked, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "This is just the beginning." It was a quiet Tuesday morning when it happened again. The sound of screeching tires and the sickening crunch of metal echoed through the neighborhood, and I knew exactly what had just occurred. My mailbox. Again. At first, I thought it was just an accident. You know, one of those things that happens when you're not paying attention. But when it happened a second time, I began to think it was more than that. And when it happened a third time, I knew for sure Karen, the HOA president, had it out for me. It started off small. She'd swerved just enough as she drove past my house, nudging the edge of my mailbox. It wasn't a big deal at first, just a little scratch here and there. I replaced the mailbox each time thinking that maybe she was just having an off day, but no matter how many times I fixed it, she kept hitting it, her car grazing the wooden post as if it were some kind of game, and with each hit, my frustration grew. It wasn't that the mailbox itself was particularly important. It wasn't even about the mailbox at all, really. It was about the principle of it. Karen was the HOA president, and she had made it clear since the day I moved in that I wasn't welcome in this neighborhood. It wasn't just the mailbox. Oh no, it was everything. From the moment I pulled my moving truck up, she'd been quick to point out that my property didn't conform to the standards of the neighborhood. She made passive-aggressive comments about my lawn, my fence, my choice of house colors. She even sent me a letter once demanding I remove the clutter from my yard, which, to my surprise, was just a few garden gnomes and an old bicycle I was planning on fixing up. Karen thought she was above everyone else. She'd walk around the neighborhood like she owned the place, acting as though her opinion was the only one that mattered. Every neighbor seemed to bend to her will, and those who didn't were either too scared or too tired to stand up to her. But me? I wasn't like the others. I wasn't afraid of her. In fact, I'd grown to despise her. I had never been one to take a passive approach, and this constant harassment was wearing thin on me. I could feel my blood pressure rise every time she drove past my house, the tires of her silver Lexus just barely brushing my mailbox. It was an insult to my space, my property, and my dignity. So I did what anyone in my position would do. I started keeping a closer eye on her. I set up a security camera near the mailbox, just in case. I had a feeling that things weren't going to stay as small as a broken mailbox. Sure enough, the next day, I watched the footage. The video clearly showed Karen's car swerving toward the mailbox with intent, hitting it, and then driving off without a second glance. She didn't even slow down. That was when I decided enough was enough. I had been playing by the rules, fixing the mailbox and ignoring her insults. But clearly, Karen didn't care about rules. She thought she could get away with it. That I was just going to keep fixing it and doing nothing. She was wrong. I wasn't going to let this go any longer. If she wanted a fight, I was more than ready to give her one. I started planning. Something small at first, just to get her attention, just enough to show her that I wasn't someone she could trample on. But I had a feeling that whatever I did, this wasn't going to end with a simple mailbox. It was going to escalate. And when it did, Karen wouldn't know what hit her. The days following the third mailbox incident were filled with a quiet kind of tension. I knew something had to be done, but I wasn't sure exactly what that something would look like. I didn't want to go overboard, but Karen had made it clear that she wasn't going to stop. She'd crossed a line, and I was done playing nice. I spent the next few days observing her patterns, trying to find a weakness, something I could use to my advantage. Karen was predictable, almost painfully so. She left her house at 7:30 every morning, took the same route down the same streets to her job, and returned promptly at 5 p.m. every day without fail. She had no idea that I was watching her. No idea that I was planning something to make her regret what she'd been doing to me. I wasn't just planning revenge. I was preparing for a war. Karen had underestimated me, and I was about to show her exactly how wrong she was. I thought about what she valued most: control, power, and a perfect, pristine world where she was always in charge. I knew that if I was going to get under her skin, it wouldn't be by confronting her directly. She would love that. She would twist it into a story of me being the troublemaker. No, I needed to do something subtle, something that would make her feel vulnerable without giving her the satisfaction of seeing me sweat. That's when the idea came to me. I spent the next several days gathering supplies. I needed to make sure everything was set up perfectly. I wanted Karen to experience the same feeling of helplessness that she had so casually inflicted on me. If she thought she could just run over my mailbox and walk away without consequences, I was about to show her just how wrong she was. I wasn't just going to replace the mailbox again. That would be too simple, too predictable. I needed to send a message that would get through to her loud and clear. I began working on a trap, something elaborate but still relatively simple, something that could do some real damage to her car but wouldn't be obvious, something she wouldn't see coming. I knew she always took the same route down the street, so I needed to position the trap in a way that would ensure she would hit it. I worked for hours after dark, making sure everything was perfectly hidden beneath the surface of the grass. I had to be careful. I didn't want anyone to notice or get suspicious. The trap itself was simple, but it would be effective. I rigged a heavy metal barrel to spring up from a hidden mechanism when triggered by the pressure of a car driving over a specific spot. When Karen's car hit the right spot, the barrel would launch into her path, slamming into the front of her car and completely wrecking her bumper. It would be enough to cause significant damage, but it wouldn't be so over the top that it looked like a deliberate act of malice. It would look like another unfortunate accident. I spent hours that week perfecting it, testing it, making sure everything was calibrated just right. If Karen wanted to ruin my day by running over my mailbox, then I would ruin her perfect world with one well-placed strike. The morning I planned to set it off, I couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement. For the first time in months, I felt like I had the upper hand. I was taking control of the situation instead of letting it control me. I was going to make her pay for her cruelty, and I was going to do it on my terms. As I set the final piece into place, I could almost feel the satisfaction already. I wasn't just setting a trap for Karen's car. I was setting a trap for her ego, her sense of invincibility, and her idea that she could do whatever she wanted without anyone standing in her way. She had run over my mailbox, but now it was time for her to face the consequences. The day of the trap arrived sooner than I expected, and as I stood by the window, watching the early light stretch across the street, a knot of anticipation twisted in my stomach. The plan had been set in motion, and all that was left was to wait. I had checked and double-checked everything the night before. The trap was in place, carefully concealed beneath the soft grass, and all I had to do was watch from the safety of my home. It felt strange, standing there with the weight of what I was about to do settling in my chest. This wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. It was about taking back some control, showing Karen that I wasn't someone she could just walk over without consequence. I had put up with her petty harassment for far too long, and now it was time to turn the tables. The minutes seemed to drag by, each second longer than the last. The clock on the wall ticked towards 7:30 a.m., the time Karen always left her house. I stood still, watching from my spot in the window, ready for her arrival. And then, like clockwork, I saw her. Karen's silver Lexus glinted in the morning sun as it pulled onto the street, heading straight toward my house. I felt a surge of adrenaline rush through me. This was it. The moment of truth. She was still a few houses down when I began to notice how easily she slid into her usual routine. There was no sign of hesitation, no awareness of what was about to happen. She swerved slightly, just as I had seen countless times before, the tires of her car skimming the edge of my driveway. She was going to hit the mailbox again, I knew it. And she did. As her car drew close to the spot, the mechanism under the ground triggered with a sharp snap. The spring-loaded barrel shot up with a force that seemed to echo through the entire neighborhood. There was a split second of silence, followed by the sickening sound of metal crashing against metal. Karen's car slammed into the barrel with a deafening crunch, sending it spiraling into the front of her bumper. I could almost feel the impact in my chest as I watched her car jerk violently to a stop, the front end buckling under the force. I couldn't help but watch through the blinds, a sense of satisfaction washing over me as the scene unfolded. Karen was stuck, her car wedged against the barrel. She sat there for a few moments, unmoving, as if trying to process what had just happened. Then came the panic. She threw the car in reverse, jerking the wheel as she tried to dislodge her vehicle from the metal obstacle, but it was no use. The barrel had wedged itself too firmly in place. Karen revved the engine, spinning the tires in an attempt to free herself, but it was hopeless. She was trapped. I felt a strange mix of triumph and guilt, though I pushed the guilt aside. She had brought this on herself. She had been running over my mailbox for months, without a care in the world, thinking she could do whatever she wanted. But now, she was the one who was stuck. I took a deep breath and stepped outside. It was time to confront her, to finally make her face the consequences of her actions. As I walked toward her car, I saw the panic in her eyes. She was already on her phone, speaking rapidly, her hands shaking. Her voice, usually so composed and authoritative, was now laced with fear. "What the hell happened?" she shouted into the phone. "I'm stuck. My car's ruined. I need help." The confusion in her voice was almost surreal. Karen wasn't used to being the one in trouble. She wasn't used to anyone standing up to her. As I approached, she slammed her phone down and glared at me, her face flushed with anger and disbelief. "What did you do?" she snapped, her voice sharp with accusation. I met her gaze, unflinching. "I guess you could call it a little payback." Her eyes narrowed, and I could see the gears turning in her head. She had always been so certain of her power, so used to getting away with anything. But today she was on the receiving end of something she hadn't seen coming. She slammed her hands on the steering wheel, frustrated and flustered. "You've ruined everything. My car's wrecked." I watched her for a moment, almost feeling sorry for her. Almost. But the truth was, I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. She had made my life hell, and now it was her turn to feel powerless. "Looks like you're the one who's stuck this time," I said, my voice calm, controlled. Karen opened her mouth to retaliate, but no words came out. She just sat there staring at me, trying to process what had just happened. She had no idea how to handle someone like me, someone who wasn't intimidated by her. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Victory. I stood there, watching Karen in her car, still gripping the wheel as though she could will the situation to fix itself. For a moment, it felt like the world had paused. The street was eerily silent, the normal hum of the neighborhood drowned out by the strange tension in the air. Karen, who had always been so sure of herself, was finally at a loss, but instead of the satisfaction I had expected, a strange feeling of unease crept up on me. I wasn't sure why, but something about her reaction didn't sit right. She didn't seem angry, not in the way I expected. She wasn't lashing out or even acknowledging that the situation was entirely her fault. Instead, she was calm, too calm. I watched her as she picked up her phone again, dialing something with practiced precision. She wasn't calling a tow truck. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't even calling her insurance company, which by this point I figured would be her first instinct. No, she was calling someone else, someone more important. Her voice was low, almost controlled, as she spoke into the phone, but the words I overheard made my blood run cold. "I don't care," she said, her tone ice cold. "Just get it fixed. The insurance will cover it. I need the car back, and I need it fast. I'll be fine. Don't worry about me." At first, I thought I had misheard her. Get it fixed? What was she talking about? Her car was a mess. The front bumper caved in and the metal barrel still wedged against it, practically embedded in her grille. This wasn't just a fender bender or a bump. It was a total wreck, and yet her voice didn't betray any of the panic I'd expected. If anything, she sounded more like she was giving orders than actually needing help. Something wasn't right. I had expected her to yell, to demand answers or some sort of retribution, but instead she was so detached, as if this whole situation didn't matter to her in the way it should. The more I listened, the more I realized how composed she was in the face of something that would have thrown anyone else into a frenzy. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I had thought I was dealing with a petty neighbor, a vindictive, HOA tyrant who liked to cause trouble. But Karen wasn't just a petty homeowner. She was playing a much bigger game, and I had only just started to realize how deep it went. Before I could process what I had overheard, I saw a tow truck pull up at the end of the street. But this wasn't just any tow truck. It was one of those big, heavy-duty trucks with a logo on the side that I didn't recognize. The name on the side read, Premier Towing Solutions. But it wasn't just the truck that caught my attention. It was the driver. The driver wasn't some random guy from a local garage. He was wearing the same crisp, professional uniform that I had seen on the HOA's contractors before. The same men who mowed the lawns, painted the fences, and maintained the neighborhood, all under Karen's control. I watched in disbelief as the driver made his way to Karen's car, unbothered by the damage, as if it were just another routine job. Karen rolled down her window, briefly exchanged words with him, and then gestured to her car as he nodded. He quickly got to work hooking her car up to the tow truck, preparing to haul it away like it was just another piece of junk. Stood there, watching, my mind racing. Something wasn't adding up. The way Karen was acting, so calm, so unconcerned, it didn't make sense. This wasn't just about a damaged car. She wasn't panicking like someone who had just had an accident. She had orchestrated something, manipulated the situation in a way that I hadn't seen coming. I thought I was in control. I thought I had the upper hand. But Karen had anticipated this moment long before I ever set that trap. She knew exactly what I'd do. She knew how to use her power to turn things in her favor, even when it looked like I'd won. I tried to make sense of it all, but the more I watched, the more I realized the truth. This wasn't just a simple rivalry between neighbors. Karen wasn't just the HOA president. She was playing a game on a much larger scale, and I had just become a pawn in it. The realization hit me hard. I wasn't dealing with a petty neighbor. I was dealing with someone who knew how to manipulate not just the neighborhood, but the system itself. As the tow truck pulled away with her car, Karen gave me one last look, her face unreadable. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips. And it was then that I knew this wasn't over. It had barely begun. The next few days passed in a haze of confusion and frustration. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped into something far bigger than I had ever intended. What I had thought was a simple act of revenge, a way to level the playing field against a petty HOA president, had spiraled into a game I wasn't prepared for. Karen's calm demeanor, her ability to make the situation disappear without breaking a sweat, had rattled me. I should have seen it coming, but I was too blinded by my anger and the satisfaction of seeing her car trapped in my trap. I began to notice subtle changes in the neighborhood. The usual rhythm of suburban life, the peaceful calm I had come to know, had been replaced by a tense undercurrent. People seemed to be watching me. The neighbors who once waved casually as I came and went now turned their heads quickly when I passed by. It was as if I had crossed an invisible line, and now everyone was quietly observing, waiting to see what would happen next. Karen's absence was another oddity. Her car had been towed away, but she hadn't been back home since. At first, I assumed she was just dealing with the aftermath of the accident. But as the days dragged on, her house remained eerily still. The lights didn't flicker on and off at night. There was no movement behind the curtains. It was almost as if she had disappeared altogether. I couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. The questions that had been gnawing at the back of my mind were now becoming impossible to ignore. What was Karen really up to? How had she turned the tables so effortlessly? And why hadn't she retaliated? It didn't make sense. She was supposed to be furious, to confront me and make my life miserable. Instead, she had vanished without a trace. Determined to get answers, I decided to pay her a visit. I had to know what she was planning, what her next move would be. The thought of facing her again made my stomach churn, but I had no choice. I couldn't let her get the last word in this strange battle we'd found ourselves in. As I walked up to her front door, my mind raced with possible scenarios. Maybe she had called in some sort of higher authority, some shadowy figure to fix the mess I had created. Maybe she was waiting for the right moment to strike back. The doorbell rang with a shrill chime, and I braced myself for whatever response I might get. To my surprise, the door swung open almost immediately. Karen stood in front of me, her expression unreadable. She looked different, more composed, even colder than usual. Her eyes held a glint of something I couldn't quite place, and I felt a twinge of unease. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm, almost too calm. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak. I wanted to talk about what happened with your car." Karen's lips curled into a thin smile, and she stepped aside to let me into the house. I hesitated for a moment before entering, unsure of what to expect. The interior of her home was spotless, pristine in that unnerving way that only someone like Karen could maintain. It was as if every corner had been meticulously curated to send a message: control, order, perfection. "I assume you've been wondering why I haven't made a scene," she said, as we sat down in her immaculate living room. "Why I didn't call the cops or come after you for what you did to my car." I nodded, still unsure of what her game was. "Yeah, I don't get it. You should be furious." Karen leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving mine. "I'm not angry with you. I'm impressed, actually. You've got some fire in you, but that's not what this is about, is it? I blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? This isn't about a mailbox. It never was. You think you've won because you made me look foolish for a moment, but I'm not some petty HOA president. I've been playing a much bigger game than you realize. I felt a chill run down my spine as her words sank in. What was she talking about? What bigger game? Karen wasn't just the neighborhood tyrant. She was part of something larger, something I didn't understand. I've been watching you too, she continued, her smile now more knowing. You're more than just a neighbor who wants to get even. You're a disruptor, and I know exactly how to deal with people like you. My mind reeled as I tried to piece together what she was saying. It wasn't just about the neighborhood, it was about control. It was about power. And Karen. She was far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. I don't know what you think this is, but you've made a mistake. You've played right into my hands, she said softly. I opened my mouth to protest, but before I could say anything, Karen stood up. You think this is over? It's just beginning. And with that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me in the silence of her cold, immaculate house. The weight of her words hung in the air, thick with meaning. I had no idea what Karen's next move would be,